All right, I am starting a new series, and that series is going to be taking a look at each of the missions within the Wolfnet format, kind of reviewing what the mission briefings and criteria are, the objectives, and then looking at a variety of considerations, including terrain, tactics, and list building, to kind of give folks kind of at least my perspective and rundown on like what works and doesn't work in these missions, and what are some things that you should be considering and looking at when you're playing so that you're properly prepared for it. The first mission in the Wolfnet format that we're going to look at is the number one mission in there, and that's going to be Bunkers. Now, Bunkers is one of the three what I consider specialized missions that includes Capture the Flag, Bunkers, and King of the Hill, in that they're radically different than the other missions. They have a tendency to play differently, and they require very specialized units to be successful, or oftentimes can require very specialized units in order to be successful. And so you really, when you're building your 350, you have to set aside a set of points specifically for completing those specialized missions. You don't have to, but if you want to maximize your chances of success, you kind of have to do that. So we're going to go through the mission briefing and then go through my notes on the considerations on terrain, tactics, and list building. So for Bunkers, there are a couple components here. If you download the Wolfnet packet, which is going to be in the description below, you're going to have 3-inch objectives. Those objectives are used in all of their missions that require 3-inch objectives. Now, these objectives markers themselves, these 3-inch diameter markers, can be used to represent the bunkers. I would recommend that you either go out and purchase the bunkers. I think they're available on Aries. They're a 3D print, or download the 3D prints that are out there. I like using those because they're three-dimensional, and it helps minimize confusion as to where the entrances are, where the 1-inch height is, where do you get cover, how do you draw line of sight to the doors, things like that. So I'd recommend doing that. I've done this before in the past, although I don't have them anymore because I gave them away as a gift. I've modeled the bunkers myself. It also makes the terrain just look better and the game look better when you have the actual bunkers on the board. But the components are 3 red and 3 blue bunkers, and then 6 D20s. So you will need 6 D20s, and these are used on each bunker to track damage. Your objective in this mission is to destroy your opponent's bunkers, and you're going to place those D20s on the bunkers to represent how much damage those bunkers can take and how much damage they have remaining. Now, these bunker templates are immune to heat, indirect fire, and artillery. So that is not going to help you at all in these missions. So, or in this mission. So if you're taking a heat heavy list, or you have a lot of IFR artillery, offboard artillery, that is not going to be something that you can use to take out the bunker. So that's going to be a big consideration there. The bunkers are technically height 1. Except the wedge, which is the back part of the bunker where the door is, that's height 0. You can move into that wedge. The bunkers are able to hold any size unit that can stand on top of the non-wedge portion of the template. The bunkers are only allowed to take damage from weapon or physical attacks that can draw straight line of fire to the yellow portion of the bunker template door. So that back template door. If you're using the 3D prints, it's also very obvious where that door is. Players cannot damage or infiltrate their own bunkers, so you can't go into your own bunkers. You can't blow up your own bunkers. Bunkers are considered buildings and therefore are immobile, so you want to keep that in your head, that they are considered immobile for when targeting. You can use both battle armor or conventional infantry to infiltrate the bunker, and basically you move into the door space, and at the end of the turn, if you're still alive, you're going to enter that bunker, and then at the end of the following phase, you're going to exit the bunker, and then the bunker can blow up, right? That's the quickest way to blow up the bunker because it auto kills it. It's a quick kill on the bunker. Otherwise, you can shoot at those bunker doors just like you would target a building or another mech and try to take out 20 points worth of bunker and then blow it up. Now, a special note on the scoring is you get 1 point for every bunker you blow up, and then or you get 1 point for every 15 points of damage you do to a bunker. So if you blow all 3 bunkers up, that's 60 points of damage for a total of 4 points. If you blow up 2 bunkers and 1 remains and it has 0 damage on it, you've only done 40 points of damage. You're only going to score 2 points. But if you were to do an additional 5 points of damage to that third bunker, that would be another 15 points total. So you would do 3. So you can actually score up to 3 points in this game, for example, by doing damage to bunkers without actually destroying them by shooting them. So the game has a sudden death mode basically under the win conditions, and that is if you or your opponent destroy all 4 bunkers, that's it, the game's over. Otherwise, the game has to go to time, and at that point you're going to count up how many points of damage you've done to the bunkers, and for every 15 points you're going to score. Of course, tiebreaker being, if say I score 2 points and you score 2 points, is going to be on our MOV, or how much damage we did to each other. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this mission. And part of it is that it can be very difficult to build your 350 list and be prepared to play this mission properly with the infantry component. There aren't many other missions within the Wolfnet format that really give infantry a strong role. And especially if you're an inner sphere player, it can be even harder because you don't have the option to run a lot of omni mechs to kind of ferry battle armor around. Clans have it a little easier in this mission because they have access to a lot of omni, especially in the earlier eras. And that battle armor tends to do better than conventional infantry in just standard games. Now, I love it because I love infantry. I love how it looks. I love everything about it. I just think it's cool to include infantry in your list. But, it ends up being kind of a tax on your list to take that infantry. Because that infantry is probably only going to get ran in bunkers and not anything else, right? Or in most of the other missions, it's not going to have a role. It's going to be kind of a sink, and your list is going to kind of, in all honesty, is probably going to be hurt, especially if it's conventional infantry. Battle armor is different, especially clan battle armor. It can be very, very good, especially if you have fast, cheap omni mechs, which the inner sphere tends to struggle with, especially in like clan invasion and things like that. So I do like this mission, but I also kind of hate the mission. You deploy the bunkers on the board. They're going to be 8 inches. You're going to have 2 bunkers on your deployment side. It's going to be 8 inches from the board, from both board edges, and your opponent's going to do the same. And then there's 2 bunkers along the middle line, 18 inches from the side and 21 inches up. Now, really important note. I see this all the time in tournaments is you have to deploy those bunkers in accordance with what the mission briefing says, meaning that the 2 bunkers that are in your deployment zone, those doors have to be facing each other at a 90-degree angle from the backboard edge and the center line. And then the center bunkers, the doors have to be facing straight back. If you don't do this, and if those bunkers get bumped during the game, suddenly your opponent is going to be able to shoot at your bunkers when they should not be able to, and your game will end very, very quickly. Essentially, your opponent shouldn't be able to shoot your bunker until they've crossed the center line. I think that's, from what my discussions with Andrew and the Wolfnet guys are, that is more or less the intent. And even then, it's only at the most extreme sides and flanks. You really have to be able to move your mechs and your units into your opponent's half in order to access those bunker doors to be able to do direct line of fire shooting. So be really mindful of that. I see people just kind of throw those templates on the ground or out there all the time and then misplace them and spin them, and they get bumped during the game. This is why I think the 3D prints are a lot better, because they tend to not get moved as much, and it tends to be a lot more obvious when they have been moved. And so just be really, really, really mindful of that. So the first thing I want to go over is terrain considerations for this mission. Now, because there are 2 ways to destroy the bunkers, that's direct fire and it's also through assaulting, you have to kind of consider that. So I like to place terrain in such a way where direct line of fire, especially from like the center line or close to the center line, is blocked and my opponent can't draw from there. So what it does is it requires my opponent to penetrate into my half of the field even further before they can start shooting. And then on the reverse side, I like to have like a sniper's nest or a spot where I can have some mechs that are bodyguarding and guarding my entrances, meaning that they can sit in kind of a small area and move around and get their TMM up, but then directly draw a line of sight to those entrances. So if you could imagine something that's ahead of my bunkers and then kind of in towards the center, that's blocking line of sight from the center line to the doors, while simultaneously leaving space open for me to draw line of sight to the doors with my own mech so that I can cover those entrances. Like I said, a sniper's nest of some sort, an elevated position where you can get something up. Now, this doesn't have to be a true sniper that has good long range damage with skill that is down, although that can be helpful for targeting opposing units on the other side of the board. It really is so that you can have elevated line of sight to your bunker entrances in the event that your opponent gets infantry or strike teams into that zone, right? So another consideration is on the reverse is preventing your opponent from doing those same things, right? So you want to place terrain. If you are placing terrain on your opponent's half, you want to do it in such a way that prevents them or stops them from blocking line of sight from the center line to their bunker entrances. So you don't have to penetrate as deeply into their half of the board to be able to draw a line of sight and get those shots off. The other thing is, depending on how you're running your list, if you're using transports, especially if you're using light transports with weak infantry, so this would be like Swift Wind Scout cars, pack rats, hover APCs, things like that, that don't have a lot of hit points. Maybe they have a high TMM, but they don't have a lot of hit points, or even some VTOLs. You want terrain that allows you to skirt the edge and block line of sight so that they're not going to be the target of your opponent, and that they actually have a chance to get in, if that makes sense. So oftentimes I'll make a decision at the beginning of the game that I want to kind of go up the right or left flank, or maybe both, depending on how many transport and strike teams I'm running. And then I'll put a hill or a wood or just something that can kind of give them something to hide behind as they move up that sideboard. And so again, block your own doors, give yourself a position, build yourself a position to be able to cover your own doors, prevent your opponent from being able to do those things. So prevent them from blocking their own entrances, prevent them from having that sniper's nest or that bodyguard nest, and then give yourself a way to hide your transports. If you're using transports, hide your transports and block line of sight to them as they move up to that sideboard. Give them something to hide behind, right? So those are the terrain considerations that I think you should take into account. Now, list consideration. The real question is here is, how am I going to achieve this objective? Now, you have to make this decision probably when you're making your 350, even before you build your 250s. You have to think in your head, what am I going to do here? And when I play bunkers, am I going to need infantry, or am I going to just say to hell with it? I'm not going to run infantry in this 350 list, and I'm going to lean into using my mechs and using my vehicles and using my VTOLs to take out the bunkers. And the reason you got to make this decision is because you have to decide how you're going to spend your points, right? So, of course, probably the easiest thing, especially for new players who don't want to think about it, but even veteran players. I surveyed probably a dozen players from the local Minnesota crew who place pretty high, win tournaments, do very well, and probably about half of them told me, anymore, I don't even bring infantry. I don't want to mess with it. My goal is to shoot the doors and blow them up, which is a very valid way to play this mission. Don't think you have to do the infantry build. Now, the drawback to that is that you're not going to be able to quick kill the bunkers, right? And so if you find yourself in a position where you haven't moved up far enough, or you haven't been able to draw a line on those bunkers soon enough, you could run out of time. Whereas if you have infantry, especially infantry that is quick, you can be in like the last 5 minutes of the game, and if you can get the moves right, you can blow up a bunker and suddenly go from no points to 3 or 4 points very, very quickly, just because of the way that running infantry works in this, because they can quick kill those bunkers. But not running infantry is a valid way to do it, and you may decide to do that because, and the reason you would decide to do that is that because there's that handful of specialized missions, right? Your capture the flag, your king of the hill, your this. You may decide, I don't want to dedicate support points to being successful at bunkers, because one, bunkers might not show up, and two, those other missions like capture the flag or king of the hill, oftentimes their specializations tend to really require a lot of points to be used up, right? So in King of the Hill, you really want size. You really need size and a little bit of speed to get on that center objective. In Capture the Flag, you need lots of speed. And many times those units that you're using don't have an ability to transport units, although sometimes they do, but they oftentimes don't, because you're running things like skimmers or other fast vehicles. And you really the way, in my opinion, to win Capture the Field is to really swamp the board with a lot of fast stuff. So you have like just a ton of options, and you're just way faster than your opponent. And that can chew through a lot of your support points. And then suddenly you find yourself not having the points to run the infantry, because you have to remember, like, the infantry has its own cost. Maybe it's 3 to 12 points, right? But then you have to pay a transport tax. And so suddenly that 3 to 12 point infantry unit has suddenly turned into a 20 or 30 point, like, kind of strike team. And that can take a huge chunk out of your list, or out of your support. And it can take a huge chunk out of your just overall 350 list that you don't have to play with. And 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 honestly, like, if you're taking 30 points and dedicating it towards infantry with transports, like, that's 30 points of stuff that really isn't doing anything other than running around trying to get in bunkers, which means that you're 30 points short of, like, uh, combat units, right, that are actually fighting on the battlefield. So what you want to do is, if you're going to lean into the infantry, you want to try to find at least some overlap. You want to find dual purpose stuff that you, especially maybe not on the infantry side, but on the transport side, dual threat stuff that you can use in other missions. So if you're going to do the infantry build, there's a couple ways to do that. First is the battle armor, and I'm going to point this out because I think a lot of people forget it, or exoskeletons. The exoskeletons can be very cheap, like 4, 5, 6 points. They also oftentimes are mechanized. And if you have Omni, and especially if you're an Inner Sphere player, that might be a cheap way to get a piece of an exoskeleton basically onto an Omni mech to get them across the board. But usually it's battle armor. This is a very good clan option, just because clans have really good Omni mechs, really fast Omni mechs, really cheap Omni mechs, and then they can throw some battle armor in there. And with the Omni and the mechanized, you don't have to take into consideration, like, troop transport, and cargo transport capabilities, and what is my, how big is this unit, and does it fit inside, and because you have to play this, like, matching game with conventional infantry and their transports. The next is your airborne assault teams. This is going to be your paratroopers or jump troopers in a VTOL, like a Karnov or a cavalry infantry, something that's a vehicle, a VTOL that has enough infantry transport space to carry something with para or jump, right? And usually the para is around 3, the jump can be around 4, or sometimes 6. It just depends on the jump unit. The next is conventional infantry transports. I break this down into 2 options. You have, like, your Maxims, right? Your heavy dedicated transport that's like 25 to 35 points, plus some sort of infantry. I wouldn't do infantry that's above a 100 as far as its attack. I think you're wasting points because they're not really doing attacks, right? So you're just trying to get bare bones infantry in there. The next is going to be something like your what I call, like, the cheap transports and cheap infantry. This is going to be like your Swift Wind scout cars, your hover APCs, pack rats. They're going to be carrying assault commandos, snipers, field medics. And then last is the plain Jane infantry, which is usually a recon infantry, beast riders, hover infantry of some sort, VTOL infantry. It's infantry with a integral move of 8 or 10 usually. So I think overall, the battle armor on Omni for clans probably is the best option, just because you're not paying that big of a transport cost, and battle armor is super versatile in other missions as well. And so you're getting more use and more mileage out of those units across all the Wolfnet missions. Now, the drawback to this is that this can be very limiting for Inner Sphere, especially in, like, clan invasion or earlier eras, where you may have some battle armor, but you really don't have good Omni mechs, and they're really slow and cumbersome. And so it almost, like, defeats the purpose. So I think the next best option really is the Maxim, running a Maxim with conventional infantry. The Maxim is very versatile. It can be used in many, many lists because it takes a bunch. It can be hit a bunch. It's got a good TMM. It also does like 3-2 damage, so it can be utilized. It's got good size, so it can be used in King of the Hill. And so you're getting this multi-function out of it. And then all you're doing is kind of picking up an infantry unit to put in there. I think this can also be a good option because oftentimes the infantry in this list are 3 to 5 hit points, and that 3 to 5 hit points, just they survive longer. So if you drop them off at the entrance, it's a lot harder to kill them before they go in. If you use, like, the really light transport, light infantry build, usually they only have like 1 or 2 hit points, and it's very easy to smoke them off the door before they are able to get into the bunker and blow up the bunker, right? Now the con to this is it's way more costly, right? Like, we're in a 27 point Maxim with a 12 point infantry list. You're up to 39, 40 points. Now that Maxim's going to be versatile because he's going to be able to shoot at doors and move around, and he's going to live a lot longer, but you are putting a lot of points into it, so it can chew into your points. The other thing is that, man, it's a lot slower, right? So that Maxim is only moving like 16 and it's only running 24, and it's just not as fast as the light transport and light infantry options. So if you do get yourself in the rears or behind, it can be harder to get caught up in that. It takes you longer to get that Maxim to the bunker entrances in like the last 5 minutes of the game, right? You can run out of time if you play it wrong. I wouldn't try to get cute with like heat infantry or infantry that does like a 1-1 damage, like SRM infantry or energy weapon infantry. It's just going to cost you an extra point or two. And you really want to shave those points and save those points because you're already paying that infantry transport cost. The VTOL option is okay. The problem there is often you have to find, it really excels when you have like paras or jump troops, because then your VTOLs don't have to land. They can just kind of fly over and they can bomb out. Putting VTOLs on the ground can be really risky. The other problem with this is those VTOLs are pretty vulnerable when they're getting shot at, and if they do get hit and your opponent has flak, like you can lose that infantry and that VTOL very quickly, especially to motive hits. It can also be harder to hide the VTOLs just because they're flying, and oftentimes I see players just forget to go nap of the earth and get behind stuff. They tend to fly too high, and so it can be really difficult. And oftentimes those transport vehicles don't have a function in other lists. I mean, they can be objective grabbers, but they're really vulnerable because they're VTOL and they've got that motive, that motive risk. I think the worst option is plain Jane infantry, and honestly would never suggest anyone try to do this. I've tried it. I've tried the like beast riders that fly and the beast riders that are on foot, and I've tried the hover infantry, and I've tried the VTOL infantry. They're just not fast enough. They don't have the HP. They're super vulnerable. Your opponent sees them coming a mile away, and you might think like, oh, I'm going to run these guys 15. Or I'm going to run these guys 12. It's too slow. They're not going to get there. Your opponent's not going to let them get there, and they're just going to die. So that, I think, is the worst option, like of all the options that you're going to do. So I wouldn't even consider it. So in the list construction, while you're taking infantry is not necessary, again, it is an option, and it can quick kill bunkers, and it can help you peg points very quickly at the end of a game if necessary. Now, I think of all the transport options, again, that Maxim is probably the best option because you're going to want to run something like that anyways in like King of the Hill and some other missions. But if you are playing a list that allows you to run those cheap transports like Swiftwing scout cars, which really is just for Capellans, right? Like those are excellent replacements for skimmers, and they can basically transport, I think, like a commando or a sniper or something like that. Those can be really, really good options because you already want something that's super tiny and super fast like that in Capture the Flag, right? And you probably want it in a lot of other missions where they can just like suddenly be on an objective and across the board. The hover APCs are also a good option for that, although they cost like twice as much. So like 10 points. So you're getting into some points there, and that can be detrimental to your 350 build in certain situations, depending on how you're building that list. So keep those things in mind when you're building your list and you're making those decisions. You want to kind of decide early on and not kind of after the fact. How are you going to play bunkers, right? And I would totally avoid that plain Jane infantry. Now, other things to consider is that snipers or indirect fire, although the indirect fire is not going to help you in destroying the bunkers, they can be very good in taking out strike teams and threats. And that sniper unit in a sniper's nest, or a bodyguard unit in that sniper's nest. And the bodyguard unit really needs to be something that does high damage output. Like if you are running assault mechs that are speed 6, I wouldn't overload your list with slower mechs in this, because you do have to get across that center line to shoot the opponent's bunkers. But if you had a really good high damage output speed 6 assault mech that could camp and guard your entrances, like kind of like midway up your half of the board, and just kind of sit there and guard those entrances and also provide some covering fire, I think having one, maybe two might be pushing it, but one of those is actually a really good option. Otherwise, you want stuff that's in that, at a minimum speed 8, but ideally speed 10, your Australs, your Ostroks, your quick draws, those kind of things. Some speed 12s possibly could do it, and then some faster stuff that can get to the other side. The other thing for a bodyguard mech, if you don't want to run like heavy assault mech and you want to save some points, you could get something that's turreted, which is also very good as well, like a heavy tank of some sort. Your stuff that has some speed, that's getting across the line, also needs to have the damage output to take like significant chunks out of the bunkers. The other thing is you want to kind of gang up on a bunker. If you're going to be shooting at bunkers, don't split your fire. Gang up on bunkers and take them out, just like you would take out like a heavy mech or enemy units. Like if you can kind of work in a wolf pack of some sort or some sort of hunting party and focus your fire so you can take that bunker out in like 2 turns, 3 at the most. You really want to do that because it can be a slog to chew through those bunkers. As far as like skimmers and light mechs go, you want something that's doing decent damage at short range. 2s at a minimum, 3s is more ideal. So like that Maxim again, it's got a 3 at short range, so it could be dropping off infantry while shooting into bunkers and moving around. If the infantry gets killed, it can still move around and put like significant damage onto bunkers. And then also you do want to consider taking flak in case your opponent tries to use VTOLs to shoot down the bunkers, or if the case they have airborne assault teams. So tactics wise, when you're using your infantry, if you're running infantry, do not throw them away. I see too often where guys just try to like YOLO sprint across the board with their infantry. And what happens is they get way too far out and they deploy them way too early and they expose them way too soon and they don't hold off. If you have really fast infantry transport options, like it's okay to hide them for a couple turns while you kind of clear the board of your opponent before moving them out. Do not throw them away. Protect them at all costs. And wear your opponent down first, especially I can't stress this enough, especially if you're using that cheap transport and infantry option, because those things have no hit points. You really don't want to be dropping those infantry off into the bunker entrance unless there's no one can see them, because that infantry with their team M0 and their 1 hit point is just going to get smoked right off the infantry. If you're not running infantry, you don't have to be super fast, but you do need enough speed to get across the line to start putting damage into the bunker as soon as possible. You want to hunt down your other side strike teams. So if you got VTOLs or hovers that do a decent amount of damage, you want to focus on them and you want to make sure that you're prioritizing taking them out, because they will take out a bunker very, very quickly. You want to force them if they've gone. So if your opponent's gone that option where they're putting points into transports, you want to hyper focus on hunting those things down and then say, you know what, I killed your Maxim with your transport and your VTOL, or your Maxim with their infantry and your VTOL with their infantry. I've taken out 50, 55, 60 points worth of your stuff. Now you have to go blow up my bunkers with your 190 points, right? Camping on bunker entrances to prevent the enemy from assaulting them is perfectly valid tactic and is not cheesy. So do not underestimate how powerful this can be to park a medium mech or a heavy mech right in a bunker entrance and prevent your enemies' strike teams from getting in. Do not be afraid to shoot a bunker, even if you think you may assault it later. Putting damage on it. What if your strike team gets killed in 2 or 3 turns and you never got to blow it up? And then again, using that sniper's nest or bodyguard nest to cover bunker entrances. Again, it doesn't have to be a sniper. It just needs something that at medium range is going to dish out a fair amount of damage to stop those infiltration teams. And do not forget to damage the bunkers. It's very easy to forget about that. And then in the late game, you're trying to rush to get hit points on there. Do not be afraid early on in the game, if you have a shot, even if it's 1 or 2, just to throw it at the bunker. It's easy to forget, or to be like, you know what, I'm just going to plink a shot off that guy's assault mech or this that you're not going to chew through. Like, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to put hits on those bunkers early on. All right, that's all I have for this mission. I'll be slowly working through the rest of them over the coming months, and I hope you guys find this helpful. If I missed something on bunkers that you think I should consider, put it in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up, and may the blessings of Blake be upon you.